Engaged alienation. Write it down. It's your first note for the day. Engaged alienation. It's a great way to think about how Christians live as exiles in Babylon. Engaged alienation is a great way to think about how Christians live as exiles in Babylon. On the one hand, we are engaged. It's hard to love your neighbor the way Jesus taught us to when we're not around any. And by neighbor, I mean the way Jesus defines it in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Somebody who believes and behaves differently than you do. That's a neighbor. Somebody who believes and behaves differently than you do. You're called to love them. It's hard to love that kind of person if we have hermetically sealed ourselves off to form a reclusive society like M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. Tough to do that. Tough to love your neighbor the way Jesus called us to love our neighbors if we don't know people who believe and behave differently than we do. Hard to do that. Hard to do missions. Hard to do evangelism if you don't know anybody who believes and behaves differently than you do. Hard to contribute to the common good the way, as we'll see, God called his people Israel to do so through the prophet Jeremiah. Hard to do that if we have hermetically sealed ourselves off from those who are unlike us. So we're engaged. On the other hand, we're also alienated. Because nowhere does God's word say that as you live in your Babylon as an exile, it's going to be smooth sailing. Nowhere does God promise that. 11 of the 12 apostles died martyr deaths. Think about that. 11 of the 12 apostles died martyr deaths. Jesus created the expectation that there will be more people who refuse him than receive him. There'll be more people who refuse him than receive him. And as we bear the name of Christ in our Babylon, we will experience much the same kind of opposition and persecution that Jesus and the apostles did. Engaged alienation. It's a great way to think about how Christians live as exiles in Babylon. We are in Babylon. Babylon is anything that makes wickedness look normal and righteousness look strange. Babylon is anything that makes wickedness look normal and righteousness look strange. We've got strands of Babylon all throughout our country, United States. There are strands of Babylonian DNA that are all throughout this country. There are Babylonian characteristics and genes inside your place of employment. Some of you work in places where wickedness is made to look normal and righteousness is made to look strange. Some of you attend schools where wickedness is made to look normal and righteousness is made to look strange. That's Babylon. That's Babylon. So as Christians, we inhabit Babylon and we're called to live wisely in this manner of engaged alienation. That's what the book of Daniel is offering us. We're going to be looking today at what is probably one of the top 5 most well-known, famous stories in all the Bible, Daniel in the lion's den. And it's not at all what you think it is. If you have a Bible, open it up. Daniel 6. Daniel 6, you got a smartphone, tablet, something with you. I want you to see the verses in front of you. We're going to be looking at the famous story of Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel is, we've been saying that Daniel's in Babylon. He's actually now in Persia. but he has not moved one step latitudinally or longitudinally. He is in the same geographic location he has been, but it's now Persia, or to be more precise, the Medo-Persian Empire. Because just like what happened with Jerusalem, Babylon comes and sacks Jerusalem. Guess what? The Medo-Persian Empire comes in and sacks Babylon. Babylon's out, there's a new kid on the block. The Medo-Persian Empire. But Daniel's situation is still the same. He's still in exile. New empire calling the shots, but he is still in exile. We're going to look at 4 principles for wise living in Persia. Can you make that adjustment? We've been saying Babylon for weeks. Can you make that shift? We're now in Persia, but it's basically the same thing. 4 principles for living wisely. 4 principles for wise, engaged alienation in our Persias, in our Babylons. How do we do it wisely? Let me give you the 4 and we'll walk through it. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Defiantly pray. Don't trust Persia's leaders. Trust the righteousness of Christ. Be never despairing and never presuming. Defiantly pray. Don't trust Persia's leaders. Trust the righteousness of Christ. Let's dig into it. Number 1, be never despairing and never presuming. Chapter 6, if you just glance at it, it actually begins with a miracle. Chapter 6 begins with a miracle. You know what the miracle is? A squeaky clean politician. Read it. It's there. Chapter 6 begins with a miracle, a squeaky clean politician. You've got these attributes of Daniel that are piled high and deep. Daniel is a civil service employee. He's working for the state. You got these attributes, these characteristics of Daniel that are piled high and deep in chapter 6. He's free from corruption. He's trustworthy. He's responsible. He's competent. So chapter 6, I give you, begins with a miracle, a squeaky clean politician. You didn't think there were any? Well, there you go. You got one right there. Now, what is this showing us? On the one hand, this is showing us how wise people conduct themselves in Persia. This is showing us how wise people conduct themselves in Persia. Before Daniel and his friends were ever hauled off to Babylon, while they were still residing in Judah, God spoke to his people through the prophet Jeremiah, providing them instructions for how to go about life as exiles in Babylon, in Persia. Here's what we read there, Jeremiah 29. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Here it is. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number, there do not decrease. It sounds like life, doesn't it? Just sounds like everyday life. And it also sounds to me like God is saying to them, you're going to be there a while. You're going to be there a while. So you do life, routine, normal, nothing extraordinary, nothing big, just normal, regular life. You're going to do that, and you're just going to do it in Babylon. Also, look what he tacks on. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So we have the engaged part of our engaged alienation. Daniel is simply living out Jeremiah 29. That's what Daniel's doing. This is not a new pattern for Daniel's behavior. By the time Daniel 6 is written, he has been serving in this way as a squeaky clean politician. He has been serving this way as an exile in Babylon for 60 to 70 years. So how do you live wisely in your Persia? How do you live wisely in your Persia? Well, you contribute to the common good. Be a productive member of society. Let your work and way of life contribute to its peace and prosperity. Be sure to be prayer warriors for your city. This is wise living in Persia, whether that's the United States or it's Mequon or it's Cedarburg, Ozaukee County, your place of employment, your school. That's what wise living in Persia looks like. But there still is behind this the hidden authority of God. There's the hidden authority of God behind all that Daniel's doing. Just because Daniel lives this way doesn't guarantee the king's favor. As we're going to see, King Darius, the king of Persia, has a heart that's endeared toward Daniel. Well, where'd that come from? That's the Lord doing that. The Lord endears Darius' heart to Daniel. So these verses are calling us to see how gracious God is in granting you favor with your Persian leaders. And so if that is possible, if that's actually laid out paradigmatically for us in the book of Daniel, then there's a takeaway for me. I'm never, ever, ever going to despair. I tell you what, Christian, the Bible does not give us much warrant for despair. It just doesn't. Seek the peace and prosperity of your city, your workplace, your school, and know that the Lord is able to channel Persia's favor in your direction. Despair ends up betraying a very small view of God. Very small. And it doesn't really take his word seriously. Now, there is a conjunction at the beginning of verse 4, which means that as soon as you read about the favor Daniel has received from King Darius, in response to Daniel's exceptional qualities and skill, as soon as you hear about that, as soon as you read that, there is skullduggery afoot. Verse 4, at this the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. And so King Darius put the decree in writing. Why are these other nefarious, prototypical government employees conducting themselves this way? Well, we could surmise that there might be a bit of envy that's taken place. Daniel's been promoted. He's very much unlike the rest of them, and yet he's successful professionally. We've seen that movie before. You probably saw it this week. Somebody gets promoted, somebody receives favor from some person in authority or leadership. They're getting what you want and you didn't get it, and so there's envy. We've seen that before. Well, perhaps Daniel was an impediment to a kickback scheme they developed to enrich themselves. Darius was clearly concerned about the financial integrity of his empire. And Daniel, being the man of integrity that he is, has come along to say, hey, look, there's all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems here. We got to shut this off and shut this off. We got to change the way we do this because these folks are enriching themselves through this. Maybe that was it. He was shutting off a revenue source for these others. Well, there's nothing in the text that would suggest we need to choose. Maybe it's both. If so, we see one constant, unchanging reality. Are you paying attention? Amid all the flux and upheaval of history, governments are huge repositories of waste, fraud, and corruption. Even when you have a perceived ally sitting in the king's chair. Just in case we get too comfortable with receiving the king's favor, wisdom comes along to say, hey, look, just because you've got a leader who is your friend doesn't mean the larger animal of Persia won't bite you in the posterior. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Now, those of you familiar with Daniel probably know the parallelism that exists between chapter 3 and chapter 6. In chapter 3, Babylon throws Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace. In chapter 6, Persia throws Daniel into the lion's den. What's the point of that? Hopefully, it's generating for you some expectation about what the Christian life might look like and feel like in Babylon/Persia. What do we call it? Same song, different verse? Is that the saying? Same song, different verse? The names may change, but the story's the same. This side of heaven, God's people will always land on the quote unquote wrong side of Babylon or Persia. I think the book is coming along to say to us, we might be tempted to think that with a regime change, God's people can breathe a sigh of relief and wipe the sweat off their brows. Along comes Daniel to remind us that wisdom sees two sides of the same coin at the same time. One side of the coin says, God is able to give you favor in Persia, so don't despair. The other side of the coin says, new circumstances don't always give you the relief you crave. You may face the same essential troubles. Be never despairing, yet never presuming. Listen, those of you who are prone to big emotional swings over changing political seasons need to learn this. You need to learn this. Don't despair. Don't presume. Humorously, it was Charles Schulz's very first Peanuts cartoon that captures this. Stunning, I know. Charles Schulz, who doesn't like Charlie Brown? Here it is, the first one. Take a look at it. In the first pane, it says, well, here comes old Charlie Brown. Notice God's grace in granting him favor in Persia. Then Charlie's right in front of them, and Persia says, good old Charlie Brown, yes, sir. Then Charlie's past them, but within earshot, good old Charlie Brown. And then once he's gone, how I hate him. Ah, yes, this is the life of a Christian in Persia. So don't despair, yet don't presume. This is how we do engage alienation. Second, defiantly pray. Verse 10, just listen to it. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. All right, so Daniel knows that the thing's been signed, the document's been signed, right? Now, there are several different ways Daniel could have responded to this edict. How would you have responded to this edict? You and I may have rushed before the king to protest the unfairness of this new law, or maybe we would have gone home in tears to complain to our friends about it. But when Daniel hears about this new law, what does he do? He continues to do as he's always done. As he's always done. 3 times a day, it was his habit to go to the upper room of his living quarters, bowing down with his face toward Jerusalem, giving thanks to God. That was his routine, and that's what he continued to do. He did not start a revolution. He did not launch an alternate political campaign. He prayed. He didn't make a scene in public holding up signs while protesting. He prayed. He didn't take to social media to vent his righteous indignation. He prayed. We are watching, folks, a masterclass in wise living as an exile in Babylon. You want to know what it's like to live masterfully in Babylon? You watch Daniel. You know, we saw this in chapter 2. This is becoming a pattern, is it not? We saw this in chapter 2 after Nebuchadnezzar issued his death sentence to Daniel and his friends. What do? What's the first thing they did? They prayed. They prayed. There is something about prayer and wisdom that go together like peanut butter and jelly. There's just something about prayer and wisdom that go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's like one nourishes the other and the other fuels the one. I don't think you can get to wisdom by bypassing prayer. You can't get there. You cannot get there. And notice again the parallel with chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were commanded to bow down and worship the idol when the big band started its tune, they were commanded to worship the idol. They weren't sure about God's circumstantial will, that is, what's going to happen to them if they don't do that. But they were sure about God's revealed will, that is, you shall have no other gods before me. They knew what they were going to do. They knew about God's revealed will. They didn't know what God's circumstantial will was. I mean, they could have been beheaded because of that. Who knows? Same thing's happening with Daniel. He is not sure about God's circumstantial will for his life. That is, he will continue to pray. He's not sure what's going to happen to him. But he is sure about God's revealed will. You shall have no other gods before me. Therefore, I'm going to continue to do this. Make note of something in both of those cases. In both the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, what idol were they being tempted to worship? Don't answer that too hastily because it's not what you think. What idol were they tempted to worship? The answer in both scenarios is their safety. I know American culture today is obsessed with safety. You know how I know that? There are no more merry-go-rounds. There are no more merry-go-rounds. You know what I'm talking about? Look, the object, the point of a merry-go-round is to load up the kids in the middle and see who the last one standing is. That's the point of a merry-go-round. Yeah, and somebody figured that out and got rid of them all because it's not safe. I wonder how American Christians would do in an ISIS-laden territory. How would we do? Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel were tempted to worship the idol of safety. They knew it. The very first thing they did in order to tackle, defeat, face head on this idol was pray. Third, don't put your trust in Persia's leaders. Verse 12. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? It's backhanded, corrupt government workers set this whole thing up. The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring, with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" I'm going to stop there for a minute. Now listen, there is an incredible oddity in this section. Incredible oddity. And the author has put it there purposefully. And it makes a brilliant point. Did you notice that in verses 16 to 20, the writer fixes all of your attention on the king? The whole focus of verses 16 to 20 is on the anguish of Darius rather than the trauma of Daniel. This is terrible movie making. A dude gets thrown into a lion's den and the camera pans away? Who does that? Spielberg would never do that. All the focus would be on what's going to happen to this guy. But that's not how the writer sets it up. The writer says, okay, forget about that for a moment. We're going to go over and look at Darius, the king. The writer keeps us in suspense about Daniel's fate until verse 21. This is very strange. Daniel's one thrown to the lions, and we only hear about the king in his agonizing night. Why? In verse 12, the writer depicts the king as naive. His own administrators outmaneuvered him into issuing this decree. All of it was a setup. In verse 14, however, we're shown the king's compassion for Daniel. But at the same time, he's helpless. The point the author's trying to do is to depict for us something in the king that's important for us. As if to say, the rulers may not be personally hostile to you, but even if they favor you, you dare not pin your hopes on them, for they can prove as helpless as anyone else. I want you to see that this is the writer's way of preaching Psalm 146, verse 3. Look at it. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. The reason the writer has left Daniel in the den and focused all of our attention on the king is to preach this. Don't put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. Darius' own words in the last half of verse 16 seem to indicate this really well. It's a desperate prayer or wish. And so what is the writer doing? The writer is doing some preventative theology. He seems to say to us, okay, you might have rulers or others in high places who are well disposed towards you, but don't rest in them as your ace up your sleeve, for even they, with all their apparent power, can prove as helpless as Samson without hair. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. Don't do it. Don't do it. Several years ago, the noted British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge was a guest at a breakfast in Washington, D.C. When he had finished his testimony, he made a number of comments about world affairs, all of which were very pessimistic. One of the Christians present said to the speaker, "Dr. Muggeridge, you have been very pessimistic. Don't you have any reason for optimism?" Malcolm Muggeridge replied, "My friend, I could not be more optimistic than I am because my hope is in Jesus Christ alone." And he allowed that remark to settle for a few seconds, and then he added, "Just think if the apostolic church had pinned its hopes on the Roman Empire." It fell. We could take every succeeding empire and say the same thing. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the Macedonian Empire. It fell. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the French Empire, it fell. Just think if the church had pinned its hopes on the British Empire, it fell. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. You want to know how to do engaged alienation wisely? You do that. Fourth, we trust the righteousness of Christ. Verse 21, Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And so when you look at Darius and Daniel, who had the more difficult night? Kind of funny, huh? Darius had the more difficult night, yet he had at his disposal every pleasure that the ancient world had to offer. Meanwhile, Daniel has nothing except the presence of God with him, and yet he seemed to enjoy a rather quiet night. What do we take from that? It's better to have a close walk with the Lord and be in the den of lions and not have a close walk with the Lord and be in a luxurious palace. Some of you are living that tension and that reality. Let me dig a little deeper into this. The lions in the lion's den, it's not as if the lions had been defanged by the angel. The angel didn't come down and turn these lions into purring tabby cats. After Daniel's release, Darius had the men who set this whole thing up thrown in there, along with their families. Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones, the text says. So what made the difference? What made the difference in their fate? There's a number of things mentioned. Why was Daniel spared by the lions while the conspirators were consumed? Well, on the one hand, Daniel says, God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. All the days ordained for you were written in God's book before one of them came to be. Your date of birth and your date of death are already determined. And no one and nothing is going to change that. It's the Most High God who holds the power of life and death in his hands, not an earthly king. But Daniel goes farther and explains to King Darius that the lions weren't able to hurt him because he was found innocent in God's sight. The word Daniel uses for word innocent is the word righteous. It's the word righteous. Now let's pause here and let's ask an obvious question. Does Daniel 6 give us a realistic perspective on persecution and suffering? Isn't it true that for every Daniel whom God delivers from a lion's den, there have been hundreds of nameless martyrs whom God did not deliver? How many of you read Fox's Book of Martyrs? Isn't that true? For every Daniel, there have been hundreds of Christians martyred because of their allegiance to Jesus. Why? Where was God then? Were those believers just less faithful to the Lord, less important to him than Daniel? Well, Christians actually for centuries have been pointing this out. This is very refreshing to read. When you go back into the centuries and see what other Christians believed about, what they said about Daniel 6, it's refreshing to see that there has been mass consensus about what Daniel 6 is pointing to. What did Jesus say? Luke 24. All of that stuff in the Old Testament is about me. Daniel is a Christ figure, not a you figure. So it's providing us something more than simply a model of how God deals with suffering believers, or how, like Daniel, we're supposed to stand firm under trials. It's more than that. It is foreshadowing in history the verdict that will be delivered on all believers at the final judgment. Daniel endured the test of the lion's den and emerged safely out the other side because God judged him and found him righteous. What happened at the resurrection? Mass vindication of the innocence, perfection, holiness, and righteousness of Christ. And as a result, the lions, which acted as God's agents of judgment, did not harm Daniel. However, the unbelievers who plotted against Daniel were found unrighteous and crushed by God's judgment. This foreshadows not just the resurrection of Christ, but it foreshadows the final judgment. So here's a question. When the scrutinizing gaze of the Most High God locks onto you, what will he see? Righteousness or unrighteousness? If the only verse we had in the Bible was Romans 3:10, we'd all be in deep doo-doo. It says, there is no one righteous, not even one. Paul is not talking about some subset of humanity. That is an all-inclusive statement. There is no one righteous, not even one. And so in the story of Daniel and the lion's den, the characters in the story we ought to identify ourselves with are the conspirators who set him up. Not Daniel. And so we need a righteousness that is foreign to us. One we don't inherently have, and one we can't generate on our own. Now, I've got some good news for you. That's not the only verse in the Bible. Just a few verses later, the Apostle Paul provides a solution to the problem that this verse creates. He writes, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which Daniel testifies. This righteousness is given. It's given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. The righteousness needed to escape God's judgment is not something earned. It's something received from someone else. And everybody with one voice said, who has it? Who's got it? I would like to know. Would you like to know? Who possesses the righteousness we need to escape God's judgment? Answer, Jesus. So how do we get it? How do we receive the righteousness of Jesus? Let me bring clarity to that question and hint at the answer by asking another one. Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? When we renounce all other trusts and believe in Jesus Christ alone for the gift of righteousness, a transaction happens. Another pastor explained this through a very simple analogy that was clearer than anything I had read or heard before. He said this, picture a sheet of paper with your name on the top. And underneath are all the sins you've ever committed in your lifetime. Okay? Everything you've ever done, said, thought, or felt that had the slightest blemish, all of it is there. Long list, short list, what is it? Mine's thousands of pages. You think bills on Capitol Hill take a long time to read? This one would take longer. Every unkind way we've gossiped, the lies we've told to protect ourselves, the angry words we've snapped at our kids, the jealousy we've felt as others have surpassed us, the idolatry on full display through binging on YouTube videos, endless streaming services, social media feeds, or gaming. The list would be endless if we considered all the ways we've failed to love God and honor him and failed to love our neighbors. Jesus has a piece of paper too. His name is at the top, and underneath are all the sins he committed. It's blank. It's blank. At the cross, Jesus exchanged his paper with ours. He took your paper, he crossed out your name, and he wrote his in its place. And he took that paper to the cross where God poured out his wrath on him for us. And in exchange, Jesus took his paper, crossed his name out, and put yours at the top. And now you have his sinless record. God looks at you and sees the righteousness of Christ. Question: which paper are you carrying around? Have you ceased to rely on all your own efforts to earn God's love and forgiveness? When we renounce all other trusts and believe in Jesus Christ alone for the gift of righteousness, a transaction happens. Jesus takes your paper from you and he hands you his. Now you say, well, what wisdom does that give us as we live in Babylon as exiles? Well, I got news for you folks. There is a kind of exile we are all under. It's called the exile of death. I don't know if this is the first time you're hearing this. Nobody gets out of life alive. Nobody. It's coming. It's coming. When you're about to enter that den of death, what's going to be your ace up your sleeve? Some geopolitical leader? He going to get you out? Or the king of the cosmos? He'll get you out. The wisdom we have from this little example, this foreshadow, this taste of how the righteousness of Christ frees us from death's grip is meant to give you an eternal perspective. It does not matter how bad things get in this life. One day, Christian, you're walking out of that den without a scratch. You're walking out without a scratch. Let's pray. And Lord, I do pray for the person who's not certain about that. There's somebody here who is still hanging on to their own moral resume as their ticket out. Lord, I pray that you'd get them to see there is nothing we can do to compensate for the endless list of sins that are charged, and rightly so, to us. There's no working that off. There's no righteousness that we generate. Your word's very clear. If we're going to get a righteousness that allows us to escape your judgment on the last day, it's going to be something we receive, something that is given to us from somebody else. And that is through the perfect life Jesus lived in our place and the death he died in our place. For the person here who is yet to grab hold of that, I pray that you would grant them in this moment saving faith. This righteousness, you tell us, comes to those who believe. Give them faith in this moment, I ask. And Lord, for those of us where that great day is in the rearview mirror, I pray that you would give us a renewed sense of joy and hope and triumph. That one day when death does come knocking at our door, we know that we're going to walk out of that den without a scratch. It just simply won't be a very big deal. Oh, what hope we have. And we praise you for it now. In the saving name of Jesus, amen.